In this video, we're going to take a look at cascading dropdowns or linked choice columns, where the value of a parent impacts the value then of a child choice column. And if I change that, then the values in the child change. This is all driven by JavaScript, but it's JavaScript that is configurable through front-end records. So let's get into it and let's take a look. Hello and welcome to this video, and this video is the second video I'm doing in a series of videos on JavaScript and model-driven apps, but it's JavaScript that can be configured through the front end. And we're going to look at cascading dropdowns or linked choice columns in this video, and it's the idea of having a value in a parent choice column. So for example, this is the team choice column, and the value selected in the parent then impacts the values that are available in the child. So you can see here we've got Hoddle, Madison, Davies when the team is Tottenham Hotspur. If I change that to Arsenal, then the players change to Rice, Saka and Adams. Now this is obviously a silly example just with football teams, but this is something I think that is pretty powerful and something that most model-driven applications that I've worked on want this sort of functionality. The only way I know how to do it is through JavaScript. If there's other ways of doing it, please do let me know. But especially for choice columns rather than lookups, it has to be JavaScript. So when I got the user interface rules working, which is the first thing that I looked at and what I covered in the first video, I thought, what else could I apply that sort of this configurable JavaScript to? And the first thing I thought of was these cascading dropdowns. And from the end user sort of application side, it's really straightforward. We've already seen it working. You have a couple of choice columns and you select whatever values you want, but that really belies the fun and games that's going on behind the scenes to make this work. One half of it is the JavaScript code. The other half of it though is the configurable tables on the settings section. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at those configurable tables now. So the main configurable table that makes this work then is the dynamic choice table. And you can see then we have a couple of records here. So basically for each of the values that you have in the parent, you have a record then in dynamic choice. And in the dynamic choice record itself, then you have some columns on the dynamic choice table, but you also have associated child records. And these are the dynamic choice option records. And basically then for each value that you have associated to the parent, then you'll have a child record for the values in the child choice column. You may have more though, because there are active from and there are active to dates on these these dynamic choice option records, so that you can sort of time bomb the values that are appearing in the child choice column. So looking at the dynamic choice columns, then we have the first one then is table, and the team and player are running on the inspection form in the application side. So that's the logical name of the inspection table. Ideally that would be the display name, but for now it's the logical name. I may come back and there is some extra functionality to add to this, and one of the things I'll be looking to do is to add in display names here rather than logical names on at least on the front end form, obviously. Then we have parent choice and child choice, and again they are the logical names of the parent choice column and the child choice column. These are all validated, so there's JavaScript that's running on this form, and these all are validating as a valid table and then as valid choice columns on that table. And then once you have a valid choice column in here, then the parent value then will be a drop down of the values associated with whatever you have here in parent choice. And then once you select a value in parent value, then this other field called parent value, really bad naming on my part, will be the label from that choice column. I should also be pulling back the numeric value that's associated with that option. I'm not on the dynamic choice side. You'll see that I am on the dynamic choice option side, but I'm not on this. I should be, but I'm not, and I'm loath to change it at the minute until I get this video recorded, because it's taken me so long to get all this working. But again, if I ever come to upgrade this, I'll bring the numeric value back in here as well, and it will be used on the JavaScript on the front end application. So that can pop in. We can select Arsenal there. That will populate that field. Then that field will be used by the JavaScript on the application side. The JSON then we can ignore. That was used in an earlier implementation of this, but I'm not using it anymore, but I am still keeping it updated because again I might make use of it in the future. So let's take a look at the validation here just very quickly. So as I said, this has to validate as a valid table. So if I put in rubbish, I'll get told that it's rubbish and these fields will lock. But if I put in a valid table, then that will be fine. Again, if I put in a valid choice column that's on that table, then this will become unlocked and those values will be pulled in from whatever they are in that, whatever the team's values are. Again, if I was to change that to player, for example, then that would be the values on the player choice column. If I was to change that to account, that's obviously not a choice column on the account table, but this is. Take the focus off the field, and then that's the industry values on the account table. So that's how that works. And again, I'll show you the code as to how that works. Let's change this back to what we want. And that's it. So the reason that this field isn't business required, and I think it's maybe gone null a few times, is because whenever this saves, then this goes back to null because the underlying parent value choice columns associated to that is just an inline one. So if I go to the parent value, where is it? Yeah, so parent value is just a default option. It's really just an inline. It's not a global choice. It's just an inline. It's just a default. So, and then I'm obviously dynamically adding in the values into this just so I can get this label basically in. So whenever I save that, I need to basically null that, or it won't save and I'll get an error. So that's why this will sort of periodically disappear, because whenever the save happens, whether I trigger it manually or whether it happens automatically, then this value will go back to null, but I will still have this value here, which then that's used by the application. For example, the JavaScript that's running on the inspection form. Hope I've explained this okay. I know I am really struggling to explain this coherently, but it's relatively straightforward, I think, to use. It's just there's a lot to try and explain in a coherent manner, and I hope I'm not losing you. So that's that. The child records and the dynamic choice option records are pretty similar. So if I go into Saka's one, again the value is blank coming into it because again the same thing is happening with it. Again, the actual values that are associated to it on the maker portal is just a default value going in. Again, this is being dynamically built from whatever the child choice column is on the parent record. So the child choice column on this parent record is player, so it's pulling in all the values from the player choice column. And when you do select a value in here, then that will update the text in the value. So you can see that is changing as I change that. So let's change that back to Saka. And then, as I said, we have active from and we have active to dates in. So that's how the dynamic choice and the dynamic choice option records work on the settings side. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to do a few demos to show how this functionality actually works. So the first demonstration I'd like to do is a pretty simple one. It's just showing you the active from and the active to dates working. So we have Arsenal selected and we have Rice, Saka and Adams. So let's go into our settings, into dynamic choices, into Arsenal, and let's just take Saka. And what I can do then is I can set these active from and active to dates. So let's say that Saka isn't available until the 1st of January. I can leave active to blank. Save and close that. Back into application, into inspections, and then Saka now is not available on the drop down, but would become available on the 1st of January. If I go back to settings then, into dynamic choices, and back in, and again the from and to dates are inclusive. So if there's nothing there, they'll basically be included. So if I go back to inspections, and then Saka's back in again. When I added the active from and the active to date columns to the dynamic choice option records, I then kind of realized that I hadn't really done the simpler option. And that's what we have over here. And this is just a simple single choice column. And what I then did is I went back and then created simple dynamic choice records with simple dynamic choice option records. And these are just for a single choice column. And really they just give you the ability again to apply active from and active to dates to those values. So at the minute, everything here is displaying because everything is active. So let's change master system and Mega Drive. And again, let's just change that so they're not available until the 1st of January, let's say. Save that. Did that update? There's an opportunity for improvement. Let's get rid of that. There, that's better. Okay, 1st of January, 1st of January. So if I now go back to the application, then they should not be available in the console dropdown, and they are now gone from the console dropdown. And again, if I go back into them, into master system, take that out. I'll not try and be clever and use the edit multiple records, just edit them individually. Okay, so again, dates are inclusive, so that should be okay. Back into choices, and there you go. And I think this is one of the really powerful applications of this, is because you can have all this set up ahead of time, and then on the date, whether it's the 1st of January, the 1st of April, then things should hopefully just work, and the correct values should appear in your choice columns, whether they're linked drop downs or whether they're just simple individual drop downs. So that's a very simple demo. Let's get into something a bit more complicated. Okay, in this second demo then, what I'd like to do then is add a few new values in here. Okay, so we have Arsenal and Tottenham in here, and we have some players in the player drop-down. So let's add a new value for team and a few new values for player to show you how this would work with an existing setup. And then in the final demo, I'll do basically a brand new choice column and show you it right from the start. But let's go into the Maker portal and into team. And I'll add in Chelsea. Yeah. So that's the team setup, and then a few new values into player. Cole Palmer. And then we'll do an old school one. Kerry Dixon as well. Okay, so that's team and player set up from the global choice point of view. So now what we can do is then add in the configuration records. That should hopefully make all this work. So if I go into settings, into dynamic choices, then what I need is I need a new record here for Chelsea, and then I need some dynamic choice option records for the individual players. So let's go with team is equal to Chelsea, and then I want this to be running on the inspection form. Then the parent choice is going to be team. The parent value, yeah, I thought I might need to do that. I'm going to have to refresh that to pull in the new values. Start again. Team Chelsea, inspection, team. That's better. Chelsea, and then the child choice is going to be player. I'll just use the autofill for that. That should be fine. Save the record to get access to the subgrid, and we'll start filling in. So let's fill in Cole Palmer first. I should really be setting the name to whatever. Okay, then we've got the text and the value coming in automatically, which is what we want. We'll just leave the from and the to dates. Save and close that because I want to create new from the subgrid. And the value this time then will be, I'll just fill in the name. That's fine. Save and close that. And again, I want to create from the subgrid, and let's do one for Kerry Dixon. Okay, that should be fine. Save and close that. And then if I go back to my application, into inspections, into the record, into the choices column, and then I have Chelsea, and I have Palmer, Madueke, and Dixon, and just to show Arsenal is still working, Arsenal still working, and Tottenham is still working as well. So there's a bit more of a complicated demo using stuff that we already have. In this final demo then, let's just start from the start. Let's just create a choice column and see how that works. Okay, so let's take a look at this final demonstration. Now I've gone ahead and actually created the choice columns and added them to the form because there was no point you watching me do that. So hazard type has a few options, and then hazard subtype has a long list of options, and each of these subtypes should be related to a type. Okay, so, and this is hopefully an example that's more in keeping with the health and safety application rather than football teams and football players. So I've done that. So let's go and start setting this up. I've also made one other small change that will hopefully make this go a bit quicker, but we'll see that in time. So if I create new, and then I will select the table again is going to be inspection. This time I want this to be hazard type, and I want the parent value, we'll do the physical ones first, and the child choice is going to be that's quite correct. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. Okay, and we will call this okay, save that. And what I'll do is I'll create some new dynamic choice option records. So here's the change that I've implemented. Just very quickly, I've locked the name, and the name will get set. We'll see it here. The name will get set to the value. So for this, I want, that's it. Save and close that. Let me pull this up to make sure I have to do this right. Sorry, just on my other screen, just for a second. Okay, let's create another one, and we'll go with moving machinery as physical. Save and close. Noise, save and close. Vibration, save and close. And finally, for physical falling objects. There, that's better. Okay, so what I'll do now then is I'll pause the video and I'll fill in the rest. The rest of these hazard types, because there's no point watching all that. I'll come back then when I'm just finishing off environmental, and we'll finish it off. We'll hopefully see the functionality working. Okay, so I've added a few more of these records in, so let's finish off with the final record, which is environmental. So new table is going to be inspection. The parent choice is hazard type. The parent value then is environmental. The child choice is going to be the subtype. We can save that. And then we want, the first one I want is extreme temperatures. Save and close that. New dynamic choice then is radiation. Save and close that. Per air quality. Natural disasters. And water contamination. Okay, so that should be that set up. And that should be all those hazard types set up with the appropriate dynamic choice option records associated to them. So the moment of truth then is to go to the application, into inspections, and then we have our types. If I select physical, then we should just see 5 options for physical. If I select chemical, then a different 5 options, biological, another different 5 options, and ergonomic, a different 5 options. And then for environmental, obviously the 5 options that we've just set up. So that's it working, and that's really how easy it is to get working. I do struggle explaining this. I appreciate that, and I hope you have been able to follow along with what I've tried to explain. But I think hopefully through the demonstrations you've seen that actually using it is pretty straightforward, and I do think it is really useful. And as I've said throughout the video, there are upgrades and there are things that I could do to hopefully make it even better. But please do let me know your thoughts on this, and let me know what you think, or if you think there's ways that it could be improved, or if you think that it just wouldn't work for whatever reason or whatever. Just send me any comments. But what I would like to do now is get into the code. So there's quite a bit of code to this. I'm not going to go through it in line by line, but we'll take a look at the code because that's the other half that really makes this work. So the first piece of code we'll look at is the code that runs on the application side, so on the end user forms. We've been looking at the inspection form and the team and player and the hazard type and the hazard subtype choice columns. So if I go into XRM toolbox and into the web resources manager, we can take a look at this code. So it starts off, we pass in the execution context. From that we get the form context. From that we get the current table or the current entity name. Then in the code we set up a lot of functions. The main execution is down at the bottom. So we get our records from the dynamic choice table, and we're using fetch XML to bring back those, to set up the query and bring back those records. And to bring back those records, I'm using xrm.webapi.retrieve multiple records, and that's part of the web API, along with create record, update record, retrieve record if you have the records, GUID, or delete record. So it's functionality that allows you to basically do CRUD operations within JavaScript. Very powerful, and I'm making heavy use of retrieve multiple records throughout the code that's being used in this video series. So we then do the same for our dynamic choice options. We bring back the right records. We have a function then for updating the options in the child choice. We have a function then for whenever the on parent changes, and then the simple options are part of this web resource as well. So just your individual choice column, your simple choice column. We have a function here to bring back records from simple dynamic choice, and then an associated query to retrieve multiple records from the simple dynamic choice option records. And then there's a function to go with the simple choice as well. So update single choice options. So in other words, that's going to work with the simple dynamic choice stuff. And then down here, then we have the main execution. So we set up the on change. So whenever the parent changes in the dynamic option, we set up the on parent change, and then that will call the on parent change function, which will then call the update to the child options, and that will call the queries, and that will then make everything work. And then we do that as part of the initial setup as well. So if we're coming into the form and it has a value in the parent field, then we make sure we call the update child choice options to ensure that the child choice column has the correct values in it on form load. And something similar then with the simple option as well. So that's how that code works. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but that is essentially how it is put together. If there's aspects of this you would like me to go through in more detail, please do let me know. This code, the other code that we look at in this video, and indeed the code that we look at in this entire video series, has been written with the assistance of Claude AI. And Claude really put a lot of this together for me without me having to do very much. However, this particular piece of code required by far the most work from me. I was in the debugger in Chrome a lot getting this to work. So Claude definitely can take you a lot of the way, but you still almost certainly will still need to do some. And in particular, this piece of code really needed a lot of my work as well, just to get it finished off and actually get it working. But there's no doubt that AI in general, and in my experience, Claude AI is phenomenally helpful. It just makes everything go so much quicker, as I said in the first video, and as indeed I'll say in the future videos in this series as well. So that's that main piece of JavaScript. What we'll do now is we'll look at the JavaScript that's running on the configuration tables. Okay, so let's look at the JavaScript that's running on this dynamic choice form. There's a couple of bits of JavaScript on this form. One piece of JavaScript will keep this JSON updated based on the values in the dynamic choice option subgrid. I'm not going to go into that because the JSON isn't being used anymore, but I will come and talk a bit about this briefly in the final thoughts at the end of the video. But the JavaScript we are going to talk about then is the validation then that's running on the dynamic choice columns here. And if I go into XRM Toolbox, it's this table validation web resource. Now, again, I'm not going to go into this in great detail and go through this line by line. There's really just a couple of things I want to point out. There's fields being set to be business required. There's fields that are being locked and unlocked based on certain things happening. But I just really want to look at the validation of the table name and the validation of the column names. So if I go down here to line 81, then we can see how the table name is being validated. So the value in here, how that's being validated. It's being validated by a call to xrm.utility.getEntity metadata, and if you watch the first video, you'll see something similar in it. And you pass in the table name, so you pass in the value that's in that table column, and if you get metadata back, then you've got a valid table. If you don't, then it's not a valid table. Simple as that. And then if it is a valid table, you go off and do other things. If it isn't, you pop an error message and say that it isn't. The other thing that I want to point out is the validation then of the column names. And not just that they're column names, but that they're also choice columns on that table. So if I go down here, you'll see then the validation of the column name is very similar to the validation of the table name, except you pass in the column name. This can be an array or it can just be a single value. So I'm passing in the value in either in parent choice or in child choice. And again, if I get metadata back, then I go on and double check that it's a choice column. And this is what this attribute 11 means. And again, this is something that I had to go into the debugger and figure out for myself. But if you go into the debugger and you do this attribute type on your metadata attributes.getByName, then attribute 11 is a choice column, and different column types will have different numeric values associated with them. So that is how I am verifying that it's a choice column. And then if it is a choice column, then away you go and do other stuff. If it's not, then pop an error message. There's obviously other stuff going on here, but as I say, most of it is around making fields business required, making fields locked or unlocked. But those are really the important parts that I just wanted to point out on that JavaScript. And then this is the JavaScript that is building the JSON. Again, I'm not going to go into this in great detail or any detail. In fact, just so you know that it is running on that form, and that's, if you have noticed throughout the video, the JSON getting if you have noticed the JSON getting updated, that's what's doing that. So then the final piece of JavaScript that I want to look at is the JavaScript that is running here on the dynamic choice option records. So the final piece of JavaScript code that I'd like to look at then is the code that runs on the dynamic choice option form. And this code also runs on the simple option. So the simple dynamic choice option form, which is almost exactly the same as this. We haven't looked at it yet, but it's the same. And the important part of the code here is the code that goes off and gets what is the child choice column on the parent record, and then what are the values then that are associated to that choice column, pull them back and add them to this value choice column. And as I've said, this is what makes all this work. If I couldn't do this, none of this functionality would work at all. This is really what makes it work. So it's pretty important, and like some of the other JavaScript in this example, it really took a lot of work to get working. Again, Claude AI was brilliant, but there was a lot of debugging involved to get this working. So again, not going to go through this line by line, but you can see here that this is the dynamic option and the simple dynamic option both working in the same web resource. So here is another XRM web API call, and this is just the retrieve record. Up until now, it's all been retrieve multiple records. But if you have the good, you can go off and retrieve a single record, and we have the good. We know what the parent's good is, so I can use retrieve record to bring back that record. And from that, then I can get the child choice column that's on that. Okay, I've named them different things, so that's why we've got slightly different values here. On dynamic choice, it's child choice. On simple dynamic choice, it's just choice. And then I call the retrieve choice options function. And in here then is where I get the options that are on that choice column, and use another familiar call. It's the xrm.utility.getEntityMetadata call, passing in the table name and the column name. But this time, rather than just checking to see if we have metadata, we actually make use of that metadata, and we get the options then that are associated with that choice column. And then we call the add options to value field function. And then in there, that's when we start adding those options to that value column. And then that allows really everything else to work. There's other stuff in here about on saves and on loads, but that is the real important part of this JavaScript. Again, I'm not going to go through it line by line. If there are parts of this or some part of the functionality you do want me to go through in a bit more detail, then please do let me know. So that's really how the code works. So that's it. Let's finish things off with a few final thoughts. Okay, just a couple of points I want to make before I finish up. The first is that I know I've struggled to explain things well at points in this video. If that is the case and there is something that I haven't explained properly, please do let me know, and I'll either respond in the comments or I'll make sure that I explain them better if and when I do an updated video, when I do a new version of this. There is a lot going on with this, but I hope you've seen it through the demo. It is actually quite easy to use from a functional point of view. It's not terribly difficult, but there are quite a few different parts to this, and I know at times in this video I probably haven't explained things well, but if that's the case, just let me know and I'll try and make amends. The other thing then I just want to mention again is the JSON. So it's not being used, but I am keeping it updated whenever the subgrid updates. The problem though is with the introduction of the active from and the active to dates, there's nothing that's updating the JSON. So for example, on the 1st of January, if there were new values coming in here on the 1st of January, unless I happen to be in that subgrid on the 1st of January, the JSON's not going to update. There needs to be something running overnight to update that, and that's where a power automate flow would come in. And I had started writing it, but I stopped writing it and I just started using the child record and forgot about the JSON. Having done that though, I'm now coming back to thinking that maybe the JSON should make a reappearance from a performance point of view. So with a couple of these choice columns on the form, everything works fine. You've seen yourself, everything works snappily enough. But what if you had, I don't know, 50 of them across a multi-tab form? What would the performance be like then, doing all those retrieve multiple records? To be honest, I don't know. But that's now why I'm thinking I should get the JSON working and do that power automate flow that updates the JSON overnight. And if you have any active from or active to records where records need to come into the option set or drop off the option set, that you're updating that JSON, and then at least maybe have an option in the settings where you could, instead of using the child records, use the JSON, because I think from a performance point of view, it's bound to be faster just to read from that column rather than retrieving multiple records from potentially multiple option sets. So that's the JSON. It may make a reappearance. Okay, so that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please let me know any comments, any feedback. I really need them at this stage. Again, this is only the second video I've done, so I need all the feedback I can get. In the next video, we'll continue with configurable JavaScript, but it will be using form notifications, which is much simpler than this, but I think is also a really useful application of this configurable JavaScript. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Please join me in the next one. Thanks very much. Cheers. Good luck.